Hi, it's really strange to have a media rumble through a Zoom meet like this, but let's do the best that we can. So, I would first like to tell all the panelists to just give a small 2 minute introduction into obviously the topic is explained in detail. So, I would like to start with Barkha. You're one of the people who have been reporting a lot and you have traveled the width and breadth of the country. So, a 2 minute wrap into what you think is the situation right now and also how journalists have been faring.
Okay, so very quickly in 2 minutes, I managed to cover about 24,000 kilometers, covering several areas in the south, the west, and the north of the country. Not enough of the east, unfortunately, but did go up to Bihar, certainly. And very early on, what I saw was that the humanitarian crisis was threatening to overtake the medical crisis, or there were two crises running on parallel tracks. I spent a lot of my journalistic energy traveling with migrant workers, traveling with them on highways, through forest lands, back to their villages, and have since followed up on what's happened to them since they've returned to their villages and are now looking to come back to the city for lack of any work or any income in the villages at all. I also covered the deaths of workers that took place along some of these journeys. And I mentioned this because I was extremely distressed to hear the government saying that it does not have data on these deaths in Parliament as it did this week. Where do we stand today? Where we stand today is that I think that the economic crisis and the subsequent shades of tragedy that is going to spring from that are still waiting to come upon us. We have so far seen the stories of the abjectly poor, but the economic crisis is now all set to hurt the lower middle class and the middle class in particular. I think the jobs crisis is going to be the next big tragedy, even as the economic and social tragedy of our informal labor sector, the migrant workers, remains unaddressed. In medical terms, I've spent a lot of time in COVID hospitals, at graveyards, at crematoriums. I think there's a lot about this virus we still don't understand, including post-COVID recovery complications, including among children. But it has long been my belief that the lockdown is not effective. The lockdown is not addressing the parts of the medical emergency that were needed, and it's causing more harm than good. And finally, since I'm sure my 2 minutes are up, I do believe, and I know my comments have upset a few individual reporters, but I stand by what I said. I believe that television news spectacularly failed the reportage of the pandemic, and that the best work on this was done by a few digital platforms, by reporters from newspapers. Certainly in their own cities, they did sterling, consistent work, and stringers who often go unacknowledged and unsung, but who have become the mainstay of many of us, and still photographers. But the biggest media houses with the biggest resources, which are our television channels, according to me, flubbed and flunked the biggest story of our times.
Okay, thank you so much. Vivek, if I could come to you next, Barkha said that the tragedy is only awaiting, that's like something bigger is going to unfold. Would you agree with that? And what is your assessment of what has happened till now?
Right. First and foremost, I would like to sort of thank the organizers that this is not a manual. One ends up being a part of many discussions where there are only men, and then they end up fighting. So, okay. Now, to take Barkha's point forward, I mean, I think, the way it started off was obviously, it was a humanitarian tragedy, and now it is a public health emergency. And the way I see it, and let me give you an example. Yesterday, Mumbai saw the maximum number of cases of COVID. And where was the news in the Times of India, which is, the main newspaper in the city? It was on page 2. A few days back, when Mumbai had seen maximum number of cases and Pune had seen more than 5,000 cases for the first time, the news was in the in the second half of in the below panel of the newspaper, not on the top panel. So what that tells you is that the most important news is not being covered. I mean, I wouldn't is not being adequately highlighted. I wouldn't say it is not being covered, but it's not where it should be. The second part is, I mean, if you look at, talking from the point of view of the economy, a there is this constant need in especially in the newspapers to highlight that the economy is recovering, all will be well soon. Like today, I think Times had the story wherein they said that just petrol consumption has recovered, so maybe the economy is recovering. I mean, petrol consumption is not the only thing that one needs to look at. There are so many other indicators which are telling you exactly the opposite. So, the feeling that I get is, at least from the way the crisis, the business, the economic part of the crisis is being covered in large sections of the media, is that if the media keeps saying all is well, ultimately all will be well. I mean, but, life doesn't really work like that. The third point that I would like to make is the fact that how non-stories have essentially become the main story of the current crisis. And I find that very, very I find that very, very disturbing. So,
okay, thank you. I'll move on to Aditi now. Aditi, both our panelists agree that the coverage has been very skewed, but I'm going to ask you not just about coverage, but even when it comes to policies, is there the marginalized sector, for example, the marginalized communities and also migrant laborers and many others, have they got the raw deal when it comes to policy and even coverage? And your thoughts about whatever was happening in the last 3 or 4 months?
Right. Okay. First of all, thank you for having me this panel. And I think Barkha and Vivek had a lot of aspects related to media. So one point that I would like to state is, you said that this is going to affect entire generation, and the second point is that public health tragedy, right? So I would like us to look at it not just when pandemic arrived, but what has been happening before that and what is happening after that. I mean, journalists like Barkha and other people did a very good coverage of migrant workers when they were walking. But then what happened when these workers reached their home? Then multiple identities come into play. So I would agree with, so the question related to migrant worker, I would like to say that when we look at these tragedies and the cost brought by pandemic, we have to look at it in two ways. One is the problem caused by pandemic, which the entire world, but the second one is the disaster caused by the state, which is being covered by media partially and not entirely. So the most important point that I would like us to focus on is the starvation related issues, because migrant worker or those did not migrate from their cities. The most important question right now is the food access to these people. So, and the second point about public health, so like I said, that since pandemic is there, all of us are talking about, hello?
Yes, we can hear you then, tell us.
Sorry, yeah. So we are talking about how this is a public health tragedy, but I'm wondering whether if this had happened in, say, one of the villages in Bihar, for example, it happened last year, when 200 children died, it became a news, and then nobody cared about it, right? So I think this is the point that everybody should be talking about, like my co-panelists have said, that the tragedy of public health, and also how migrant workers are being affected by it. So the 3 points that I would like to touch in my when I'm talking to you is starvation related deaths, public health, why it is important, why it has always been important, and the role of social security nets when it come to those belonging to marginalized section, like you pointed out. Yeah.
So we'll come back to that. I think I'll divide the whole session perhaps into 3 parts. First, we'll finish off with what's good and bad in journalism. Then we'll talk about economy, and then finally to what Aditi said about how a large community is not being looked at properly. So, Barkha, I mean, there's a lot of criticism that the media has not been, especially like you said, the television media has not been involved in the story at all. And from June, of course, they are very busy with the death of Sushant Singh Rajput. Now, it's all fine for us to, both of us are out of television. You, of course, were an editor. You are out of television now. Is it easy for us to judge like that, sitting outside, considering there is also the fatigue amongst viewers and they don't perhaps want to watch COVID and channels are only reacting to that? The other question I want to ask is, but then what, from March to June, when Sushant Singh's death had still not happened, at that time, what did you think of the coverage and what more should they have done? It was very basic, I thought.
So that's the whole point, Dhanya, and thank you for asking me this, because we do need to split up our comments on television news into two specific phases. One is pre the Sushant tragedy and one is post. Let's talk about pre the Sushant tragedy. To my utter shock, because I am a child of television, unlike many people who went from the newspaper world to television, I'm a first generation television journalist. To me, coronavirus, the pandemic was a made for television story. There was it was a made for TV story because the visuals were so stark, were so dramatic, the stories were so searing, were so moving, right? Yet I saw, and I stuck my neck out, and I said this in an interview to Priya Ramani, as I traveled, did not see the presence of television on my journey. Now, I don't know if this means that in some city there wasn't the odd reporter doing some story, but essentially this was not a television-driven story. And I don't watch TV anymore, but when I would look at what was happening online, and that's really where I consume television content now, all I would see were recycled interviews of the same 4 experts. No matter which channel you watched, it was either that or it was Hindu-Muslim. It was a Hindu-Muslim discourse. Even, you picked up the Tablighi Jamaat, and no doubt that mass religious congregations are irresponsible, but that's all that some channels were carrying. So we saw either talk-driven coverage of the pandemic, chatterbox-driven coverage of the pandemic with recycled guests, even in our so-called more enlightened news channels, or we saw a communalization of the pandemic on our more inflammatory channels. It's only when a handful of digital platforms put such public pressure, such pressure with the migrant worker story, that you saw some of the TV anchors deciding to step out, but they stepped out briefly and they retreated back into their studios soon enough. And I think that what we really learned in this coverage is that you do not need massive capital, you do not need massive resources, you just need passion, you need a commitment, and you need a consistency, and you can get audience attention with very little resources, with a 4-person team and an Ertiga Maruti car. I think that our work, along with others, the few others who stepped out, was able to get public attention. So yes, I do judge television. I have no comprehensive reason for why we did not see reporters all across India and a reporter-driven coverage of the pandemic. That's the first point. Now you come to the post-Sushant Singh phenomenon. Dhanya, yes, there is a fatigue with COVID coverage. I don't doubt that. We see it even in our numbers on our digital platforms. I've been trying to get public attention to the fact that oxygen is running scarce in our hospitals, that children are developing rare inflammatory complications, that doctors are dying, that people who say they've recovered do not fully recover, and we can't seem to get people to care. I don't know what's going on. There is a kind of emotional and intellectual fatigue. But does that justify wall-to-wall coverage? I'm not saying it's not a story. The stories related to the film industry and crime stories do have their own place. We've all come from newsrooms. They have their own space. They trigger other emotions in the audience. But do they have this kind of space where it's at the cost of everything else? Secondly, we signed up to be journalists, not only to do mass entertainment or to get mass numbers. We signed up to be journalists also to do stories that make people uncomfortable, that they in fact want to turn away from. And if people are fatigued, there's something wrong in our storytelling, because till our storytelling is powerful, a person should watch what we're doing, right? So maybe we need to reflect and change the way we are telling the COVID stories now. To get public attention back, we need to make people understand that this is not about other people, it's about all of us. And I do not see any moral justification, any intellectual justification for the kind of naked misogyny, naked witch hunting, naked sort of gossip masquerading as news that we have seen on our television channels. So that is my pre and post comment.
Okay, thank you for that. Vivek, if I could come next to you. I've seen your quotes and your articles where you have spoken about the fact that the fall of GDP in India is much more serious than in other countries, though the government has been trying to create the impression that, look, all countries are facing the same problem. Since we're sticking to journalism for now, how in-depth do you think has that coverage been about how the economy is doing? And I sometimes feel as a journalist that though there are certain things that journalists take very seriously, whether it's health policies or economy, and all of them do report it, there is some belligerence on the government's part, not just the union government, but even certain state governments, but they don't just care. They do not change anything that they have pre-decided despite the negative coverage. But how have you felt the Indian media has sort of covered the economic crisis that India is facing?
So I think, I don't watch television, so I really don't know. But I guess by far the newspapers have done a half decent job. I mean, it's not as bad as, when it comes to covering the humanitarian or the public health part of it. Having said that, the problem is that, a lot of writing on the economy is in a language which most people cannot understand, number one. Number two, most of this writing is limited to English language media. And is extremely esoteric, and it's sometimes you feel it's like it's been written in code which only a few people can understand. Third, what happens is that because the social media is so strong, so the moment something happens, there is this entire system working towards making it wrong. So let me give you an example from yesterday. So Bloomberg did this story. Day before, I think, Bloomberg did this story on how Toyota Kirloskar Motor does not want to expand in India, right? Within a few hours, so one vice chairman said this, then within a few hours, another vice chairman came out denying the entire story. So, so there is this, media management happening, which doesn't let the right story come out. The same thing happened with the GDP numbers, wherein when the Indian GDP collapsed by 24%, everyone said, so what? But the US GDP collapse was 32%, which was wrong because, that 32% was calculated using a different method. If the same method was used as it is used in India, the US numbers were close to 9%. Now, no one even bothered to ask this basic question. If the US GDP collapses by 32%, the whole world would go crazy. US is by far the biggest economy in the world. It has 25% of the world's GDP. So if that contracts by a third, you would have a second Great Depression upon us. People would be losing jobs left, right, and center, and you wouldn't even know what has hit you. But no one asked this basic question, and everyone just, kept sending that forward where, if India contracted by 24%, US contracted by 32%. So that's how it is.
And I would just like to add about the Toyota story. From what I saw, in fact, the second interview which the other vice president gave, he was not even denying the first story.
No, he wasn't. He was just trying to he was just trying to walk his way around it. He didn't deny it. He just tried to walk his way around it, and then, it was presented in a way that he's denying it. So.
Yeah. That is good media management. Aditi, if I can come to you, a point that Vivek made actually, because you're based out of Chennai, he was saying that a lot of the talk about a lot of writings on economy and what is the impact on economy is largely still in English language media, right? It's not permeated to language media. Have you seen that big sea of difference where how language covers? If you have been observing, if you have not been observing, then could you tell us what you thought about how the coverage has been about marginalized communities, about people perhaps, like how there's a huge problem because a lot of people don't have Aadhaar to even get get something for the public distribution system. So those kind of things, if you do look at language media, then do start with that.
Okay. So I am not based out of Chennai. I'm from Bihar and I'm based out of Bihar right now. My office is in Chennai, so I won't be able to answer the first question. Sorry?
It's at the Kriya Institute in Chennai, that's why.
Yes. I am with Kriya, but my project is going on in Bihar, in Hyderabad, so I'm in Bihar right now. Yeah. So I'll answer the second question. So I'm glad you asked me that. So before I start with Aadhaar, I would like to connect the points with which I started initially about starvation, death, and public health and social security. So I think all of us must be aware of Sonia. She's a Dalit girl. She was a Dalit girl from Agra who lost her life because she did not have access to food, and the government is denying. They will not accept it as a starvation death. So starvation has become a very important story of our time, but it has always been. Why it is very important for marginalized community is that when it comes to PDS or when it comes to social security net, the access is very important, but along with it, the exclusion that these communities face make it impossible for them to survive in these times. For example, say when pandemic came in India, the government resorted to what? They increase entitlements for PDS. They sounded as if they're increasing NREGA payment, but that was actually not the case. But anyway, so they targeted PDS, NREGA, cash entitlements. They increased. They sent cash transfers to the account of single women and all these people, and they also relied a lot on public health, and all these things which were neglected all this while gained government's attention during pandemic. So I think this is the time that all of us should be using this opportunity to make sure that the exclusion which happens in these government schemes, which are very important for those especially belonging to marginalized communities, should be strengthened. For example, like you mentioned about Aadhaar. So I did one research in one of these areas in Delhi where they introduced point of scale machines. So that is biometric authentication. And what I found along with my co-author is that the exclusion has increased after that. And this has been quoted so many times from different scholars and activists. So whenever there is exclusion in social security nets like PDS and NREGA, it affects marginalized communities more because these people are overrepresented in jobs which has no security of any kind, right? So now is the time that we should at least together come together and increase the demand to do away with all this exclusion. And when we talk about social security, I would also like to quote Babasaheb Ambedkar. He once said that ultimate goal is something which everybody imagines, but you should be thinking about the beginning. And so why I'm quoting him here is that when you imagine these policy, when you talk about the implementation of these policy, you have to also incorporate that caste plays a very important role when it comes to implementation of anything. So for example, there are a couple of stories, I think one by Bloomberg India itself a couple of days back, where they did a story on NREGA job card distribution. And like I said, that government relied a lot on the social security. They thought that, okay, we are increasing entitlement, we are giving you job card, so you must have access to some sort of security. But the story pointed out that the job card is being given to those belonging to dominant caste or those belonging to the relatives of those in power. And those lower caste people do not have access to any of these, right? So all of these, so to conclude, what I'm trying to say is that starvation is the most important story, and I don't think it is being covered enough.
Okay.
Along with that, right now, I would also like that media cover a lot about the demands to have right to healthcare, to make public healthcare more accessible to everybody, and also do away with the exclusion which is there in social security. And it has been repeated so many times, and I think it is a time that it should be repeated more and more. Yeah, I
Thank you.
think, have I answered your question?
Yes, you have. I need to go to Banjo. I'm really sorry, but in this Zoom video call where there are lots of screens, I completely missed to come to you. So yes, please give me a 2-minute take on what you have. You're someone who covers public health, who writes on public. My question to you is that something which Vivek and Barkha also mentioned, even Aditi, there's no sustained I mean, for other than health reporters who have been doing this for many years or health journalists, we never look at policy at things in a sustainable way. Like it's not sustained coverage. Have you felt that even during the pandemic, this interest would go off immediately when there is a vaccine, and we would not look at how to improve our public health sector?
Hi, Dhanya, it's fine. It happens in Zoom conversations. Vaccine is not going to be the silver bullet for us to begin with. So the scare will remain around for some time, and therefore health journalists will continue to sustain at least the time till this pandemic sustains. Talking about the coverage of health issues in general in times when there was no pandemic, yes, you are right that health journalists hardly get space, especially on TV media. I mean, when was the last time before this pandemic when you heard health being discussed, apart from few special shows which few channels try to screen? So at least what this pandemic did was it made health a discourse on TV media. And why I'm talking about TV media is we like it or not, but it remains the medium which is heard the most, which is which has greater greater reach more than any other media. So TV media introduced the terms like pandemic, introduced the terms like community transmission, introduced the terms like clinical trials. I mean, we were never discussing about these terms before. But I wonder why in first few months all this was to be explained by those people who did not have much expertise in infectious diseases. Now we do have infectious diseases, very good infectious disease experts in this country, and the reporters from print and digital mediums were quoting them. But in the initial few months, we really did not find them getting any screen time. It is only recently that you have started hearing epidemiologists or maybe some vaccinologists on TV. So TV really needs to do a lot about, needs to learn first a lot about health coverage. Who needs to speak, what needs to be spoken, and how it needs to be spoken is something that TV needs to learn. Vivek was talking about news being pushed to page 2, page 3. Vivek, at least now you are saying on page 2, page 3, otherwise we might not even get this space. Or a 500-word story would get reduced to a 100-word single column story. So it's not that I'm deriving any sadistic pleasure out of this pandemic, but this is how our, media goes. The digital platforms, on the other hand, as Barkha was also saying, they do give adequate space. So my hope is actually with digital platforms, with magazines, of course, with newspapers too. Well, to talk about this pandemic, see, this is not that something we did not know. WHO has been, warning about it for many years now that a pandemic will strike. When it will strike and where it will strike is something we did not know, but it has been warning since years that a pandemic will strike and it will be a respiratory pathogen. Despite we ignored those, all countries across the world ignored those warnings left, right, and center. There are reports after reports to suggest we did absolutely nothing to prepare for those pandemics. And now when a pandemic has struck, we do not know what to do. We are just caught unawares. So that is how the state of policy and the state of media goes insofar as health is concerned.
Okay, so the question to you, what I would like to ask is, do you think India has done capacity building as far as the public health sector goes? Because we were told that the lockdown is basically a time period for capacity building. And should there be more serious and in-depth coverage into the public health sector? I know that a few newspapers have done it dedicatedly for years, but should there be more efforts? Should media houses be allocating more resources into looking at this on a daily basis now?
See, I come back to that. We have really good health journalists in the country, and we don't know most of them. I mean, other than the journalists themselves, they are not known to readers. They are not known even to their editors, right? So it's not that we do not have resources. It is just that we don't want to look at those resources. They are some of the finest media journalists across the world, I must say, and most of us have learned our craft from them. So you have to look how you have to use your resources. You don't need more resources in health journalism. At least you start using those resources to the fullest. That will also serve the purpose. You asked about lockdown. See, lockdown as it's a common cliche now. It just gave us time to prepare for the worst. But pandemic is not a one-time thing. Another pandemic will strike. WHO has been saying it consistently. Now, when the pandemic has come, we are doing the best we can do. We are making more PPEs, more ventilators, more oxygen beds, etc., etc. But public health, like, Rome was not built in a day. Public health also can't build in a day. Public health certainly can't build when the pandemic is in. You have to build it over years. India, as far as India is concerned, we have been spending just around, Vivek would also know it better, just around 1.2 to 1.3% of the GDP. Way back in 2011, an expert group formed by the government itself said we just have to spend at least 2.5% of the GDP on health. We have been spending somewhere around 1.2 to 1.3 since historic times. And we have, India is one of the countries, it is the country where out-of-pocket expenditure on health is highest across the globe. We have pushed millions into poverty because we have forced them to buy health, which was the job of the state. So if you don't do investments over time, and if you think that when a pandemic will strike and then we will start doing investment and then we will set our house right, it is not going to happen. It is certainly not going to happen.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're going to soon get questions from our audience. I would like
just
to
wanted to make one point.
Yeah, sure, tell me.
So you talked about capacity utilization, building, not utilization. So, a few months back, I was looking at some data on essentially the number of doctors. So if you look at, if you compare Kerala and Jharkhand, which have reasonably similar populations, Jharkhand has around 6,000 doctors, Kerala has 60,000.
Yes.
If you look at Karnataka and UP, Karnataka is around 1/3 the size of UP. Karnataka has around 1.23 lakh doctors. UP has around 78,000. So this tells you that, there is obviously a problem of doctors that we all know. But beyond that, once you start comparing it state-wise, the problem is so big that it cannot be sorted out in, a day or two or in a month or even in a year. This is something that can be only sorted out over a decade or two if someone looks at it seriously and keeps following it.
Okay, so we are getting a lot of questions from people who are watching the session. So I'm going to go to Barkha first. The question to you, and I would like to combine a question of mine. The question to you from someone who's watching this is, and Banjot, you can also take this after Barkha replies. Which young reporter have you noticed covering the COVID crisis well? Can you recommend a few names of people we should read, watch, etc.? So both of you can answer that. Barkha, my additional question to you is that we have done the postmortem of how bad the coverage has been on TV. But like you said, there is an impending tragedy waiting. At least the next few months, we're going to see it playing out. How do you think the coverage has to change from this moment on, and what should we be focusing on?
So I want to name two people whose coverage has really stood out for me. I don't know if they would qualify as young, but what the hell, I still think of myself as young. So I'm going to do this purely on merit. Lata Mishra writes for the Mumbai Mirror. Her work is absolutely outstanding. I don't know her personally, but I find that so many stories that I have followed up. Two people I'd like to actually mention. One has been Lata, and the other has been Sautik Biswas of the BBC. And I find Lata has been reportage driven and Sautik has been analysis driven. It's an instructive example for television anchors especially, that even if you're not reporting yourself, there is a way to do a deeper dive into an issue with data, for example, right? Where you spend days studying the data of something before you do a story. So for me, Lata as a correspondent, as a journalist, really brilliant reportage out of the city of Mumbai. So she really does stand out. I hope I'm getting her last name correct, but I think it's Lata Mishra.
Yeah, it is Mishra.
Lata Mishra of the Mumbai Mirror. I want to make special mention of Praveen Jain, who's a photographer with The Print. He, I think, is probably the only person who has traveled more during this pandemic than I have, maybe even double of me. He got corona in the middle. He was COVID positive. He was quarantined in Gujarat for 2 weeks, and then he was back on the field covering it. So for me, these are two people, really, if I shut my eyes, and Sautik for analysis, these are three people who really stay with me, and their work continues to be. They haven't taken their eye off the ball. They haven't moved on to Sushant Singh Rajput. They are continuing to cover the COVID pandemic. So please do read them and do watch Praveen's spectacular images. He's a photographer. He doesn't write, but he does photography. Do please look out for him. What should happen here onwards? We need to be picking up. The issues are staring us in the face. Like I said, when we started reporting, we all thought we needed ventilators. Now we know that what we really need more than ventilators is high flow oxygen. Right? I'm not a health correspondent, but I developed just some knowledge by consistently reporting. Banjot would know much more. But we know now that we know high flow oxygen. We know now that the daily supply that COVID hospitals are asking for has more than doubled. How does this not make anyone in this country nervous that we are possibly running short of oxygen? The WHO says that 15% of all COVID patients will need high flow oxygen. We need to be focusing on this. The second
area.
Banjot?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Dhanya, you wanted to ask?
You can finish the answer.
Okay, quickly, I won't take a long time. The second issue that I think needs attention is recovery. What's happening post-recovery to actually do to look at long COVID, with the phenomenon called long COVID, that this is going to play out in ways to have the patience to look at what happens to a patient after she or he is discharged from hospital. The third great untold story of our times is education, the digital divide, what's happening to people who are falling off the digital map, and then what's happening to parents who are losing jobs and are not able to pay school fees. Private schools are taking full fees, but teachers have been writing to me saying we're not getting full fees. But when you ask the school management, they say that we are taking these full fees so that teachers can be paid, but teachers say they're not being paid. Children in their teens, children below 10 are being locked out of classes. How are we not on the streets? How are our parents not on the streets about issues like this? Imagine being 8 years old and suddenly being told that you no longer belong to class. Education. Then, of course, the public health emergency. I tried to break down some of the issues. And finally, the economy. We are waiting for an economic... I actually think, I'm not an expert. Vivek and Banjot are experts in this field. But my sense from traveling is that we are staring down the precipice of an economic catastrophe. We need restoration of economic activity. We need much greater government spending to create a stimulus in the market. And where is the... Okay, I agree, newspapers are doing their job. Do you see this on prime time? Where are all these issues on prime time? TV prime time, I mean.
Okay. Banjot, would you want to recommend any names of people that everyone actually can take turns and just tell the audience any names that you would recommend?
Dhanya, I would not recommend any particular name because see, in health journalism also, if one has done some good story, the other has done some really other good story. So if I were to name someone, I would not be doing justice with the other one. All that I would say is keep following digital mediums and then after digital medium, the newspapers. Yes. The advantage with the digital medium and the newspaper is they get time, or they really want to do a deep dive. See, one challenge with health, I suppose it is challenge with other beats also, but one challenge with health journalism is if I have to write one quote, maybe I would speak to that expert for 45 minutes to understand what science is he or she trying to convey to me. I am not a trained doctor, a trained microbiologist, or a virologist, immunologist. I mean, all those specialties. I am a journalist. So I talk to him or her for 45 minutes to write a 30-word or a 50-word quote. So health journalists have got to be very, very patient. And their editors have also got to be very, very patient to allow them to understand the science and then communicate it to readers. See, what happens when you don't communicate good science? As Vivek was referring to that story of, most Indian media outlets reproduce the story of a Chinese former scientist saying this virus was creating in Wuhan lab. The story was published just 2 days ago, right? There are hundreds and hundreds of scientific papers which have debunked this story left, right, and center. Now, if one scientist had said this to a foreign television, all those outlets which carried this story, was it not their job to at least send an email to this scientist and ask some counter questions? If she hadn't replied, you could have easily said that she did not reply. But it was their job to question this. They just printed this story as it was gospel's truth. Now, what did it do? It created a lot of misinformation. Those media outlets who published this story, they also knew that it is not possible. But why did they do it? Just for the sake of some hits? Just for the sake of some views? See, you are dealing with issues of life and death. Please spare health journalism of these hits and misses and views. Give time to your health journalists to speak to experts and to communicate the science the way it should be communicated. I mean, I have to really name...
Okay, tell me. Yes.
So please go ahead.
Because there are lots of questions coming. People are just flooding with questions. Vivek, I'll quickly come to you. The question to you is, how have different states responded to the crisis? And which states have responded well? Which ones are struggling? Is a question you've got. I would like to quickly add about the job loss scenario. We are reading the 20 crore jobs, or perhaps more jobs are lost. How do you stem that now? Is there a way in which India can stem that job loss, at least to some level? So two things.
I mean, I'll take the job loss question first. I mean, there are no shortcuts to stem this. See, what people don't realize is that the Indian economy was going down even before the COVID crisis struck, right? And COVID only, COVID obviously has now made it much, much bigger than it would have been. So the time to sort of start doing things was almost, 2 to 3 years or 4 years back. Now, what obviously can be done is that you need to carry out the required reforms and then hope that things sort of start recovering in the next 2 to 3 years. I mean, there are no real immediate solutions here. I mean, see the point about the government spending more. Yes, the government can spend more if it wants to, but ultimately the size of the Indian government and is very small in comparison to the overall economy. And the second point is that the delivery mechanisms are so bad that the government spending isn't really a solution per se. Talking about states, I mean, I really don't know. I mean, this is something that probably will have to be studied in greater detail before one can answer it in a simple way. So I really don't know the answer to that question. Also, I just wanted to make one more quick point. You were talking about what to read, what to follow, and what. So I think, I mean, I won't name a journalist, but I think the long story page in the Mint, which comes out Monday to Friday, is doing a pretty good job of covering the crisis across, different dimensions. And to make a disclosure here, I also write for that page once in a while. So that page is something that people should seriously follow.
Okay. I will, Aditi, before I come to you, Barkha needs to leave. So I'm just going to ask a quick question to her and then say goodbye. So Barkha, very important question has come from someone in the audience. They're asking that there's been this, there's a mental health crisis also along with the COVID crisis, but has the coverage of the Sushant Singh death actually pulled us back when it comes to the conversation on mental health? And does that also impact the way we are going to look at the pandemic and the mental health crisis because of that?
I'm so glad that this question has been asked. And personally, I had a little bit of a struggle, rather as a conflict, I should say, as a journalist, because I had Sushant Singh Rajput, one of his therapists, reach out to me through a common acquaintance. And she wanted to issue a statement, and she kept telling me that no one in the mainstream TV world, and she, according to her, even with newspapers, she didn't know too many people. She'd not managed to be able to make this point. And now it's well known, so there's no harm in repeating it. She wanted to go public with the fact that he'd been diagnosed with a bipolar disorder. And I asked her, and it was a journalistic conflict for me, why she was breaking patient privilege, because I had to struggle with that. And I know some people felt uncomfortable that I did choose eventually to give her this platform. And she told me that she thought it was her public duty. She wrestled with this question long and hard, but she found that the way mental health had been trivialized on television, she feared that more lives could be driven to suicide, to potential suicide, and therefore she felt it her duty to go public with this. And I leave it to the audience to decide whether I did the right or the wrong thing. But I did let her issue a statement and carry it on the Mojo story because of two things. One, the rank misogyny, and two, the complete trivialization that we've seen of mental health. Now, I don't know how Sushant Singh Rajput died. It's not a story I've covered. I don't know whether it was suicide, homicide, culpable homicide. I don't know anything about it other than what I've consumed. And that also not enough of it. But what I do know is that the complete aversion to even discussing the possibility that someone can be mentally ill, the complete aversion, the reluctance, the opposition, the resistance to even consider the fact that this could be the case has undone decades of work done by healthcare practitioners on the issue of mental health. And as a journalist, the way I have tried to compete, so to speak, with the noise around me is I recommend that all of you look up an interview done by a corporate person called Asha Pillai. She works in the gas division of Shell companies. She's the CFO. And she did an interview with me describing the condition of being bipolar, but continuing to not just work, but also be a parent, a spouse, and live a completely functional and, dare I say, use the word casually normal life. And I was trying to say that our assumptions that someone is fully functional, so they can't be mentally ill, is such an ignorant formulation. And it would be one thing if we were just saying that TV has become tabloid. But TV is doing real damage here. It's doing damage to issues of feminism. It's doing damage to issues of mental health. It's doing damage by not focusing on issues that really matter. So I wish we could just be benign and say, ये तो tabloid हो गया. क्योंकि चलो हो गया, हम सब किसी ज़माने में थोड़ा tabloid news तो हम सबने किया है. I wish it was benign, but it is not benign. It is not just a hunt for numbers. It has gone from banality to evil. And what's happening with mental health is an example.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I myself am
really sorry, Dhanya, but I have to go. Thank you, everyone. And
yes, thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. Thank you.
Bye.
Right.
Aditi, I will come to you with the question from the audience, and I would like to also add something to it. The question is, what measures do you believe should be taken to ease the economic distress faced by marginalized communities? Is Manrega going to be enough? What about direct benefit transfer program? The question I want to ask you is that there has been a lot of reporting on migrant laborers leaving the place where they work and going back to their home states, right? But do you think the focus is no longer there on what is happening to them after they've gone back?
Okay.
And what have you been observing? How are people faring now that they've gone back to the states from which they had migrated?
Okay. So before I answer the question, then I would like to mention 2 points, which is connected to what Barkha and Vivek has mentioned. So there is one platform called Public Bolti. This is on Insta and Twitter also, and they have a very good coverage of migrant worker, and they have also been covering issues related to bonded labor. So I would recommend that you also follow that. They have really good coverage. Related to economy, I agree with Vivek that economy was going down. Public Bolti, yes. So yes, economy was going down even before pandemic, but the consequences were not so harsh on everybody, especially the working population. So there is one paper by Professor Ashwini Deshpande where she looked at the first month data of employment, and she found out that upper caste lost job by 7 percentage points, whereas SC/STs lost their job by 20% point, which is almost 3 times more. And this worsened for when you're looking at lower class, right? So human capital played a very important role in those who are losing their jobs. So this economy aspect, I'm connecting it with education, right? How the entire topic of we wanted to focus the session on the impact on the generation, right? So now Barkha mentioned about what is happening with education. So these working population, everything moving online. These people do not have any access to income. They are completely dependent on government schemes right now, at least a lot of them. And the education is going on its own speed. Upper caste community, middle class community is able to at least catch up with the education, but those belonging to lower section are not able to catch up with the education. Their parents losing their jobs. So this generation is probably bearing the highest burden of pandemic and the steps taken by the state. To answer the question about what happened to migrant when they went home, so I mentioned initially when I started talking that there was enough coverage of migrants when they were walking, but what happened when they went back home? So I mentioned about how NREGA and PDS would have played a very important role, and it has actually played a very important role. It's just that the exclusion which were there, which these exclusion largely had been state created because of Aadhaar and because of the discrimination which is prevalent in village system. So I don't have any first-hand information about it, but I have been reading about it. And there is one more report by Meghna and other scholars there's a group called Rhodes College. They spoke to 115 people during lockdown, and they found out that most of their income has gone down. 68% reported their income gone down, and they are also skipping meals. So this is a situation that these workers are facing when they're going back home. And the only thing that they are dependent right now is in the name of employment is NREGA. For food is PDS. For health, these two are still there, but for health, they do not have any access to anything. I will tell you, there is one case which happened in Bihar where the patient died outside the hospital. Why? Because hospital refused to admit them, and the social location of the patient had a very important role to play there. So there is no any specific answer to what is going to ease the distress that migrants are facing, but definitely it is the time that we should be focusing on bringing the journalist and activist scholar, everybody should be talking about how important social schemes are for everybody, especially for those belonging to marginalized, and how and I think currently strengthening NREGA, increasing the wage for NREGA, and thinking about similar employment guarantee in urban areas is the most important step that the government should be talking about, and we should be advocating for.
Thanks,
I
Aditi.
hope I answered.
Yes, you did. Thank you so much. Vivek, the question to you is, the government said, in fact, Banjot, you can also take this, but I'll add a small, another question when I come to you. Vivek, the first question to you is, the government has said that it has no data on the deaths of migrant laborers, which is why there cannot be a talk of compensation right now. So how can the government really get away by saying something like this? And who is supposed to give data? Who is supposed to collect data? And it is really frustrating for me personally that there is no proper debate on the fact that the government just says something so callous in the parliament.
Yes, and so the point is this: the government doesn't have data on this is not surprising, given the fact that the government doesn't have a data on a lot of other things. So, like we do not have a proper measure of unemployment in this country. So, if you cannot measure something as basic as that, trying to measure how many people have died while walking to their homes, I mean, that's next to impossible for them, which is why, they've made the casual statement that they have. I mean, I honestly do not have a answer for this. I mean, it just stems from the fact that our systems are rotten. So.
Okay, so we've got just, I think, around 10 minutes left. Banjot, the lack of data, is that something that health reporters are always flummoxed with, because there's just not enough data to probably do most of your stories? And is there a deliberate attempt to actually hold back data from journalists and from researchers or whoever is looking for that kind of data now?
Thank you for asking this question. I was really waiting it to be asked. To begin with on this data controversy, strictly regarding the health domain. On Tuesday, the Minister of State for Health, Ashwini Chaubey, said in Parliament there is no data as to how many healthcare workers died while treating COVID patients. Now, yesterday, as most of you might have read by now, the Indian Medical Association released a list of 382 doctors, district-wise, state-wise, their addresses-wise, specialty-wise, how many of them died while treating COVID patients. So, and the reason that Chaubey gave in the parliament was that since health is a state subject, therefore they don't have the data. Then they should not have data for any health related indicator. Why just for the death of the healthcare workers who died treating COVID patients? I mean, if health is a state subject, then as per that argument, we should not know how many COVID cases we have in India, or what is the positivity rate in the state, etc., etc. So this is very strange for ministry to say that they don't know how many healthcare workers have died. You were asking if we struggle because of lack of data. We struggle badly, and we struggle a lot. For example, it's been, I think, 3 or 4 times now that in the weekly presses we have asked the ministry to give us a breakdown of out of the total tests that are being conducted across the country, what is the proportion of RT-PCR tests and what is the proportion of antigen tests. And the significance of this question is because the RT-PCR test give you better results than the antigen test in layman's language. Now, last, when we asked this question, one of my colleagues asked it, she was replied by the ministry saying that, all state bulletins are giving this breakdown, go and ask them. We have it, but we won't share it with you because you have to ask the state governments. If you have the data, why can't you share that with us? And if you look at the state bulletins, not more than 9 or 10 states are doing it. So as somebody who is sitting in Delhi, from where do I get the breakdown that which state is conducting how many antigen tests and which state is conducting how many RT-PCR tests? This is the most basic problem that we are facing, while reporting right now. So they give you the basic data like number of cases, number of deaths, but when it comes to any data which is much more serious than that and which can lead to a serious debate, they really don't share that with us. Even if you file RTI applications, the replies are either vague or they are not replied. So data is becoming a huge problem. It has remained a problem for us. But in this pandemic, we realize it has become a much bigger problem for the health journey.
Vivek, do you fear that this data cover-up, if I can call it so, is going to become more intense in the days, weeks, and months?
Yeah, I mean, the chances of that happening.
Not just for health, but but the economy also. I mean, I forced.
Can't hear you.
There's some problem.
Yeah. Internet is also data at the end of the day. So. Yeah, I think I didn't hear you properly. Anyway,
if you just repeat the question,
would become even more intense in the months to come, both both in terms of the economy and of course health data.
Right. So I think there are two things. One is whether data will be covered up. Logically, it seems yes, but I mean obviously I don't have a precise answer for that. But I think more than the cover up, the bigger danger is the way all this analysis happens on the social media, wherein there is misrepresentation of data and misrepresentation of data by well-known people. It's if you look at this entire 24-32% debate that happened, you had likes of Mohandas Pai essentially, sharing that sort of data. And Mohandas Pai, having been the past CFO of Infosys and the head of HR, has some credibility in the market. There was Mr. Surjit Bhalla, India's representative, a very well-known economist. So I think that even if data is presented correctly, the way it will get analyzed on the social media and the way it will get projected, and what we receive on our WhatsApp forwards, what we receive as WhatsApp forwards, I think that is a bigger danger, even if data is not covered up. So I think we've lost her.
Anna is frozen again, I think.
So Vivek was referring to misinterpretation of data in terms of economics. I have seen some serious misinterpretations on social media in terms of health data, the pandemic data, whichever is emerging. As I told earlier, the problem with health coverage is that it has involved a lot of science, and we really need to talk to a lot of people before we really interpret it. The oversimplified interpretations on social media by some renowned names, I would really not like to name, by some renowned names, spreads a lot of misinformation. And since those names are renowned, it becomes very difficult for people like us to debunk it. So my only request, my only appeal is, there's no harm in sharing those data, whichever the government is sharing. But if you are interpreting it and if you are not sure what you are writing, please do speak to someone, because otherwise, it becomes a mess which is very difficult to clear.
Dana, you're on mute.
Okay, I think I'm having internet issues in IT city of Bengaluru. So we have done with the questions. One last question, I will just come to each of you. A quick roundup answer and then we will finish the session. Someone has actually asked, why should health be under the state? Doesn't this pandemic show that we should be a private healthcare driven country? Vivek, would you like to take that?
We are a private healthcare driven country. I mean, I guess this gentleman has probably not traveled around enough. I'll tell you something, I was talking to someone in the morning today and we sort of got talking, and he made a very pertinent point. I live in the city of Mumbai, and people in Mumbai, and I'm talking about people who can afford, top class healthcare, they have the money to do so. And they have come to the realization that India does not have public health infrastructure. So basically what is happening is that even if you have money to throw around, you are still unlikely to get the best health care possible. So this is for people who make, probably 30, 35, 40, 50 lakhs, even more during the course of a year. So this, this class of people has come to the realization now that India does not have public health infrastructure. And I mean, so it's our healthcare infrastructure, whatever exists, is public, is private driven. I mean, I don't know what the confusion here is. So.
Aditi, would you like to make any comments as a conclusion? Quickly, because we are run out of time.
Yeah, I think Yes, I think the question would have been better if the question was what percent of GDP, 4 or 5% of GDP should go in health. That would have been a really good question. And
That's fine. You can just
I think
any other
when yeah, sorry. And when it comes to data, I mean, Banjot and Vivek has covered most of it, but I think that does exist some data, and most important that we have India's ranking in global hunger index. It's very poor, and I think that data was important enough for government to consider and think about the steps that it's taking. So I think data is existing. It's just that government is not willing to take it up. Probably they have some problem with maths and they only like names of Muslims and SC/STs. But yeah, I think data is available. And in fact, there's one data curated by Rhodes Scholars where they have 900 plus data of those who died during lockdown. And those are non-COVID deaths. Most of them are COVID, but they died primarily walking or starvation or during financial distress. So yeah, I think I would like to conclude my talk with this.
Okay, so that's it. I think we don't have any more time. Thank you very much. But more or less,
Dhanya,
everyone.
just one sentence, yes. I would say. Yes. I since we have run out of time, so I won't make any concluding remarks as such. But I have just appeal to make as a health journalist to all the people of this country, whether vaccine comes or not, whether you get it or not, please keep wearing masks. Please follow social distance. This is the most important vaccine around, and this is going to be the most important vaccine around. That is the only thing that's going to save you.
Okay, so keep your masks intact, practice physical distancing.